Hi, Tom from bknutrition.com, and today I want to talk about my best advice for growing big legs in your leg training or in the gym. Now, so when I was competing as a bodybuilder, I was always renowned for having a good set of legs. But it wasn't always that way. Certainly when I was coming up through the ranks in my early bodybuilding career, my legs were nothing to really shout about, and it's something I really worked on. And I remember I did get heavily criticised at one British Championship I was at because I wasn't holding my legs properly. My legs didn't look as big as they should have done. So I made sure I put a real effort into thinking about how to grow big legs, and it was something that in my later years I was well renowned for having incredibly well defined and also very big legs. So and this is something I get asked a lot because people do ask me how I got my legs so big, and let's first of all just get into one thing, is that genetically that does help. If you have good genetics for muscle growth, then you're going to have a better chance at growing big legs. And say if everybody in your family is very thin and very gaunt, you're probably going to be up against it for that. So you need to look at your genetics first of all. So the things I'll talk about here can be applied to your training to sort of maximally take advantage of, but applying these methods are not going to get you, a massive set of wheels if you're not genetically able to do that, but they will improve that. Now, when I was looking at building my legs and building up the shape and the sweep, because sweep is so important. If you don't know what sweep is, it's when you come for the hips and you come out and then you come back into the knee. That sweep is what gives the illusion of a bigger leg. So many people, when they talk about growing bigger legs, they talk about growing a bigger sweep. Now, what people do when they go into leg training is that they get obsessed with this heavy squat thing or the heavy leg press thing. Now, I've done lots of different types of training. I've done stupidly heavy leg press, I've done very heavy squats. I think my maximal squat when I was about 92 kilos was about 220, 5 plates aside, very, very heavy. It was almost surprised I didn't get crushed under that weight, but I have done those heavy lifts. But I didn't do those for the whole of my career because I always got better results from backing off on the weight and doing more volume. Now, for example, if I was looking at volume training for legs, something I did really well was front and rear squat supersets. Now, this might sound, it's just 20 squats, what does that matter? Say 10 and 10 of each. But actually doing the front squat first, I found generally tends to, not so much pre-exhaust, but sets you up for a decent amount of afterburn when you're doing the rear squats, because generally we can do more reps on a rear squat than we can on a front squat because we're generally much stronger with the bar on our back than we are with the bar on the front. So if you do front squats first and let the weight of the exercise be decided by the front squat, when you come to fail on the front squat and you go straight into a rear squat, you can still handle that weight quite comfortably. However, because you've done, say, 10 reps on front squat first, you're going to be fatigued because it is quite cardio intensive doing that sort of work. So the rear squats then generally become a little bit harder to do, and you have to push yourself a little bit harder for that. The other thing to remember is that when you're looking at volume over, say, incredibly heavy weight, the body has certain redundancies available to it. So say when you're pushing a maximal weight, the body will fire out from its spine, the neurons going into the muscle, it will fire the signal that it thinks that is required to lift that muscle. Now, an example of this is if you've ever looked at heavy the box you thought was going to be really heavy to pick up, you went down to pick it up and it was lighter than what you imagined, but you end up throwing it in the air because your body, your brain says we're going to need a lot of neurons firing in order to get that box up. So you lift it up, that's lighter than I thought, because you've applied more force than what you thought you needed to, and obviously you quickly correct that. However, when you're thinking about applying the force to a muscle, the body builds in certain redundancies. So although if you're lifting a super heavy squat, you might be able to lift that weight, you can always do things like drop sets and stuff like that because the body does not fire every single one of its muscles all at once in order to get that lift. It'd be very unlikely that would happen. When people say, I went to complete failure on squats, they probably didn't. They went to failure on how many muscle muscles were firing because the body applied those neuron signals to the muscles to fire them. Now the issue here is, and this is a prime example, because if you do squats, you can always walk away from a squat. You might need to sit down for a bit, but you can always walk away for a little bit from a squat. You never get out of the squat and completely collapse on the floor, because the body has kept some muscles in reserve in order to facilitate you walking away from the exercise. So you're never going to apply 100% to this maximal lift. Now what that means is the body's keeping some of your muscles, just muscle fibers, back as a redundancy in order to fire so that you can walk away. So you're not actually recruiting 100% of the muscle there. And this is where techniques like drop sets come into play, and the sort of the theory behind that is, excuse me, because if you do things like do a heavy squat, yeah, okay, you're going to be lifting a heavy weight, you're going to be stimulating the body to lift more weight. However, you're not recruiting all of the muscle fibers. And as bodybuilders, if we're looking to build the muscle maximally, we want as many muscle fibers to fire as they can, so that the failure signal is sent to all those muscle fibers so that they all have to grow at once. Now, if you look at, say, strength athletes, although they've got big legs, they're generally not bodybuilder size in terms of their legs, because they have built, yes, more muscle, but they haven't built it in a way that every single muscle group is firing. So sometimes you look at, say, strength athletes, and they've got almost misshapen legs where they fired the muscles to lift the weight, but they're not too concerned about aesthetics. So as a bodybuilder looking to grow more legs, we are looking at aesthetics and growing the muscles as fully as we can. So that's the reason why I prefer to do things like drop sets and more volume work, because with volume work, or yes, the muscle will fire those muscles to be able to lift the weight, but because it keeps a redundancy back, there'll be smaller muscles able to fire to then lift the weight past what you would do for normal. So say like your normal reps would be, say, 10 reps on 100 kilos. If you drop it back to 90, you will get your 10 reps and you might fail at, say, 11 or 12, but there'll be other smaller muscles that are able to handle the load once you get past the 12 reps. Then you might do 20 reps. So then you've got to think about, well, how much weight have I actually lifted in that set? So if you do, say, 10 for 100, you've lifted 1,000 kilos. If you do 20 on 90, you lifted 1,800 kilos as a total result over the course of the set. So which one is more productive there? Well, for strength, yes, the maximal weight's going to be more productive, but in terms of stimulating as much muscle, well, those lifts have got to come from somewhere. That extra weight has got to be lifted by something, and it's not always going to be those first fibers. You're going to start failing. And prime example of this, if you do an exercise, immediately you start, you'll always have very good form, you'll always lift correctly, it'll be easy. As you get further into the set, and the smaller muscles start to fire and the bigger muscles start to fail, you'll tend to find the form starts to go. Although you can still lift the weight, the form starts to go because those muscles aren't used to firing that way, and they are taking over and trying to complete the lift. And eventually you do fail, because unless you went down to, say, a squat with just the bar, then you would always have those redundancies in place. And so the body keeps those redundancies there so that you can walk away from the set. Now, if you've ever done things like 3 or 4 drop sets where you continually drop and drop and drop and drop, that's the principle applied to this redundancy. You're targeting the body's redundancy so that when you get to the last couple of reps, you might only be lifting, leg extensions is a good example of this, you might only be lifting like 5 kilos on the leg extensions, but those 5 kilos are the hardest reps you've ever done. And you think, how can I not lift this? This is ridiculous. And when you get off, you have to sit down, and you might feel sick. And the sickness is the body's way of sending you a signal to say stop, because you won't be able to walk if you carry on. So that's why you get this sickness signal. It's the body's giving you a nausea signal to stop, to actually stop you doing the exercise. And then people talk about, like, oh, I've extinguished all the glycogen out of my muscles, I couldn't train any harder. If you actually look at studies that have been done on bodybuilders and actual bodybuilders, this isn't a study done on sprinters, this is an actual bodybuilding study where they gave them like front squats, rear squats, leg press, leg extensions, all these other things. They did a test on their muscle glycogen content at the end of that, and these people had got smashed in the workout. There was still 40% glycogen left in the muscles. And that's the body's redundancy coming into place, is keeping the glycogen there so you can walk away from the workout. So you can still walk and still run away from predators or whatever. That's the instinctual thing. So you've got to remember that there's always going to be this redundancy. If you want to maximally stimulate the muscles to grow, you need to go into that redundancy if you're training. And this is why volume training, especially for legs, is so important, because we walk around on our legs all day. Apologies if you don't walk around on your legs all day, I don't mean any offense by that, but most of us walk around if we're training legs, we walk around on legs all day. So the body is used to keeping glycogen in there, and the body's used to carrying the weight around all day. So if you come into leg training, the body's going to think, well, I've got to walk around after this. So it's going to keep some of that energy in redundancy. It's going to keep some of the muscles in redundancy. So you've got to, if you want to grow the legs, you've got to force the issue a little bit by doing volume. And this is why I do things like 70 rep leg press. A lot of my programs have a reverse pyramid on leg press. So you start on 20, then 30, then 40, and there might be a drop set after that, because you're looking to target that redundancy, so the body has to work harder. So this is how I grew my legs so big, is by thinking about that redundancy and thinking a bit smarter about how I'm training. And I'm going to think, well, actually, yeah, while doing a heavy squat is nice, and while doing a heavy RDL is nice, and that sort of stuff. And yeah, you do need to lift heavy. You do need to, there's no point doing a 10 kilo squat for 1,000 reps. That's not going to do anything really. But you've got to think about, there's heavy, but there's also volume. And I would say as a bodybuilder, the volume part of things is going to be the thing you really, really want to target. If you want the muscle to grow maximally, that's what you've got to target, that volume overload principle. And the problem is, a lot of people aren't willing to do that with legs, because leg training is a horrible thing to do. They don't like doing it. I've had people come to train with me when I was doing competitive bodybuilding, and we do 3 or 4 exercises, but well, that's it. No, we've got lunges now. We're going to walk up and down the car park just to get that redundancy. And we used to do, and I still do it every now and again, walk up and down my gym car park with just a set of 10 kilo weights in the hand. And that's not a very taxing thing. But at the end of a workout, where you're looking to get into that redundancy, get into those small muscle groups that haven't fired and the small muscle fibers that haven't fired, that's the way to do it right at the end. And so yes, obviously you've got to still train smart. You don't want to overload. Always remember the principle from Lee Haney: stimulate, don't annihilate. But we also want to be thinking about taking advantage of this redundancy and targeting the redundancy that always exists in a muscle group. And it's not always about training heavy. I've seen people train heavy legs. Absolutely, they do heavy legs, but they also do volume work as well. Some of the biggest guys who had the biggest legs, say like Tom Platz and stuff like that, did immense squats, yeah, but they also did 30, 40, 50 rep hack squats and leg press and leg extensions. They went for the volume as well as the strength. Although there's always pictures of them doing, 6 plate squats or whatever. Yeah, they didn't do that for 20 reps, but their leg press was, the hack squat was, the walking lunges was, all those things were volume, because they understood the principle of redundancy. And that's what you've got to understand. If you're going to grow big legs, you've got to think about the principle of redundancy. It's not always about the heavy squat, the heavy leg press. It's not always about that. And as a side note, you've got to think about your joints and your back and all those other things, because when you get older, you're going to regret doing those 6 plate squats if you aren't taking care of your joints. Okay, so I hope this helped. I hope it gave you some insight into my previous training, how I grew my legs, and I hope it's given you some insight on what you can do and maybe change up your training to get a better use and maybe make your training a bit more fun. If you want to see some of my leg training videos, they are on my Instagram, Tom_Blackman_nutrition. If you scroll down enough, you'll find some videos of me training legs, and there's also some on this channel. You can look at the workout videos here. So I hope that helped. If it did, please comment below, please like, please share, etc., etc. And I'll see you on the next video. Cheers.